The whole of Gaul is divided in 3 parts, one of which the Belgae inhabit, the Aquitani another, and the third a people who in their own language are called Celt, but in ours, Gauls. They differ among themselves in respect of language, way of life, and laws. The river Garonne divides the Gauls from the Aquitani, and the Marne and Seine rivers separate them from the Belgae. Of these 3, the Belgae are the bravest, for they are furthest away from civilization and culture of the province. Merchants very rarely travel to them, or import such goods as make men's courage weak and womanish. That was from Julius Caesar's Gallic War, Book 1. Welcome to Hot Takes on the Classics. My name is Tim McIntosh, and I am joined by Emily Maeda, who will be taking us through Julius Caesar's book, The Gallic Wars, during this podcast season on war. Hi, Emily.
Hey, Tim.
It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, too. Are you excited?
I am excited, especially because I'm very ignorant about the Gallic Wars. I have heard wonderful things about it, but I don't know much about it. So I'm going to be a little bit along for the ride here. I'm curious about why this section of the book.
Well, let me read you a little bit in Latin, and then I'll tell you.
Okay, great.
Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres, quadrum unum inculant Belgae, alium Aquitani, tertium qui ipsorum lingua Celtae, nostra Galli appellantur. So there's our first sentence that you read to us.
Yeah.
And there it is in Latin. And any high school Latin student knows those lines.
Why?
Well, for years and years and years, and this year is the last, it has been on the AP Latin test. And even previous to that, it was considered a perfect text to take students transitioning out of learning Latin grammar into learning higher Latin.
Huh.
Because, we'll talk about this in the writing of it, Caesar's Latin is very simple and very pure. He writes sort of textbook Latin. So if you're trying to have students who don't know all these different conventions, well, this is a great text to take them through. So if you looked at Latin curriculums for years and years and years, there's tons of vocabulary relating to war, to armies, to cavalry, to horsemen, all getting students ready to translate this text. So, surprisingly, I mean, the first thing, is it anything about war? No, we start off with nothing about war. And it's actually one of the interesting things about the text is that it's not just about war. Caesar kind of likes to think of himself as possibly a geographer and also an ethnographer before ethnography is really a thing. So
really?
Yeah. So you get it there. You get his geography, right? He's trying to name and say, here are where these people are. And let me tell you, these are the landmarks that do it. So his geography is really, really odd. As if you read it, you will see this. You're like, wait a second, that's not correct.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it also is sort of his drive to name and contain it. Do you know? Like, if you can name it, if you can map it, therefore you somehow, in some ways, control it.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense, right? So it has also, this book has come into a lot of controversy last 50 years, maybe, because it is his account of probably what we would consider genocide. Because he's very happily relating his complete destruction of many of these tribes.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I'm curious to know, like, where are we in history? Like, Julius Caesar, like, this is one of the great titans of all time. Where do we find him? We've been talking about the Greeks, and we started with Homer. This is kind of almost ancient history. We've gotten to more contemporary history. Where is Julius Caesar on the map? Where is he on the timeline?
I'm so glad you asked. So this is written somewhere around 50 BC. So we did We did Heracles and the Great Age of Athens, Thucydides' account of the Peloponnesian Wars. That was 400s BC, right?
Okay.
So we've gone past Alexander the Great. We've gone past the Punic Wars in Rome, and now we've arrived at the end. This is the end of the empire, or the end of the Republic, sorry, the beginning of the empire. So it's written somewhere around 50 BC. So
Rome is divided, this is kind of helpful for me. Rome lasts for a really long time as a kind of, I don't know, government system over a group of people, but it's broken into thirds. The first third is ruled by kings. The middle third is a republic. And then the last third is an empire. And the empire, depending on who you ask, Emily, either starts with Julius Caesar or it starts with his nephew, Caesar Augustus.
Yeah. I kind of fall into the camp that it starts with Julius Caesar.
I do too. I'm glad we're of one accord on that.
I'm glad too. And I mean, you can see this. This is empire thinking, right? He's going into Gaul to extend the empire of Rome. Like, that's what he's caring about.
Yeah.
And,
that's right.
And he's going to cross the Rubicon with his art.
Famous moment, like one of the kind of like absolute pinpoint moments that Western Europe changes decidedly at that moment, the moment really that he crosses the Rubicon, right?
It really does. And all of the background to that is this, right? Because he has been a consul. So if you're a consul in Rome, you're one of the leading citizens, right? There's two at this point. You're going to get more. But he's given up his consulship, and so he becomes a proconsul to two provinces, Cisalpine Gaul and Gallia Narbonensis, which is essentially the high, right above the Alps in Italy, and then also modern-day Provence. And so in the account, it's always called Nostra Provincia, our province, because the Romans have controlled this province for the longest time in Gaul. So they've been, because it's right on the coast, so they've been trading. So it's really interesting in his account when he starts, he says the Belgae are the most fearsome because they're the furthest away from civilization and they don't get imported goods because those things make men's courage weak. So there we get a very Roman value, don't we?
Okay, and this is so interesting because I'm thinking back to when we were talking about Heracles.
Yeah.
Heracles' funeral oration makes this case that the Athenians are a great warrior people, but they're also really cultured. They have the best of both worlds. And he's like, the Spartans are just a military culture. They don't care anything about music, about art, about import, export. They don't care anything about those things. And we can still whip them. That's how great we are. So it sounds like Caesar, now 350 years later, from a different people group, he's a Latin, he's an Italian. He is kind of saying, the Spartans were right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, do you think that's right?
I do think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of talk about that in Roman culture, that the ideal is a more Spartan way of life. They don't eschew culture in those things. But for sure, this idea that stuff from the East corrupts and feminizes you, that is for sure a strong idea. So isn't it interesting? Those furthest away from trade, from imported goods, from luxury, they're the bravest.
Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah. So it is super, super interesting. So Caesar, how do you feel about Caesar, Tim?
Oh, what a fun question. If I have to choose pro or con, I'm more con, but I have to say, I have so much respect for the man. As far as just like a titan among the human race, an absolute titan. The more I read about him, the more I just think he was one of the bravest, one of the smartest, one of the most daring people maybe ever to live. And he was positionally in a great place that he could actually exercise all those things and bring about incredible world change. What do you think about Julius Caesar?
Well, I was thinking about it this week, and I was thinking, we've done a podcast on Richard III, so not quite the same as Richard III.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say Caesar is a bit in that camp where he does so many really awful things. Like, I'm going to read you a few selections in a minute. And he's like, yeah, and I killed 258,000 of them. That was awesome.
And he has no regret over this. Is that true?
Right.
Yeah.
But then you do read it, and I'm going to read you another part of one of his speeches where the battle was on the knife's edge, and Caesar got down and sent his horse away and stood with everybody else and fought and, pulled everybody back from the brink. And so then I feel exactly as you do. Like, you admire him even though you sort of don't want to, because he does seem to possess these qualities that they're not, like, his men respect him and listen to him. And in the Civil War between him and Pompey, who's gonna, they're gonna fight for control of Rome. Oh my gosh, Caesar is for sure the better character in that matchup.
Because Pompey is not.
Pompous. He's he's horrible.
Right.
I hate him. Yeah. But anyway, I have the exact same feeling with Caesar. Like, you just sort of love him, even though you shouldn't. I know it. Okay, so let me tell you a few more things about kind of how he writes it. So it's written in really simple and pure Latin, really beautiful Latin. I love it. He uses this construction called the ablative absolute. Any of you have studied Latin, you know the ablative absolute. He uses it all the time. But it's this very succinct way of saying, and when this had occurred, now all the events. And so he's like sort of, I don't know, you just get the feeling of his speed. He's like going to use the least amount of words to tell you a lot of things that happen. Do you know?
Yeah.
So he's not going to,
another way in which he's Spartan.
Yeah,
he's Spartan in that regard also. Okay, yeah.
Let's not forget, though, he ends up with Cleopatra, so he's not that Spartan. Let's just be clear about that.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so he writes it almost all in the third person, which is really, really funny. So he's always writing about himself in the third person. There's one occurrence of him speaking in the first person. Isn't that funny?
That is.
And almost the entire thing is in indirect speech. Like, it was reported. It was said, this was said to have happened. So, I mean, with both of those things, third person and indirect speech, what do you think that sort of gives the impression of?
So this is off the top of my head. It sounds, we don't like the word objective, but it sounds like maybe a little bit distant.
Totally. I think it's totally that. Like, I'm not saying this about my son. I'm saying this about Caesar. And when it's reported, right, it just has a little bit of an air of something that's been accepted.
Journalistic fact.
Yeah. So there's two instances of direct speech, only two. And both of them, and it's interesting because we're going to be talking about the Aeneid in a little bit, both of them have to do with soldiers in the midst of battle calling their comrades forward. But there's a scene between two soldiers who sort of outdo themselves in bravery, which is very much like Nisus and Euryalus. Did I say his name right? Euryalus. It's an account in the Aeneid as well. So anyway, interesting, because many people think that, I mean, it's just sort of, it's a common trope in Latin literature to have this. So Caesar does it, Virgil does it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Only two spots. And then, as I said before, it's also an account of ethnography and geography. So he goes in between his accounts of his battles. He is really trying to, I think in a way, name and therefore hold the expertise on who these people are. You know what I mean? So this is being reported back to Romans in Rome. Like, you would stand in the forum and you would hear these read out, because it's his reports of what he's done as the leader of the province, right? So he sends these reports back to Rome. People stand in the forum. They listen to them read out. Nobody's been up there. Nobody knows what this is like. And so he holds all the power in that. Do you know what I mean? He is telling all of Rome, this is what these people are like.
So it's kind of like, it's kind of a travelogue.
Yeah.
It's reporting back to people who presumably have never been to these parts of the world. And he's saying, this tribe is like this. That tribe is like that.
Yeah.
And so there's probably an intrigue there for people who want to experience the world more broadly. Now, and do we know the motives behind writing in this way? Like, why not just report, and then the army shifted to the hills and we rained down fire upon our enemies? We have an understanding about why he would be so interested in ethnography?
Well, I mean, I think we could use the term Renaissance man. Of course, the Renaissance hasn't occurred yet, right?
Right.
But he's a polymath. He really is. I mean, there's accounts of him really enjoying. Strabo is a great geographer, so he he's interested in these things. So it's kind of him dipping his toes in different things that he himself is interested in. He's kind of a polymath. Like, he likes lots of different things. And I also think you can't underestimate the power of, like, when he describes what the Gauls are like, what they look like, what their customs are, they're kind of terrifying people. Were they that terrifying? I don't know. It's a little bit hard to say, but he is building up these seemingly impossible people to defeat, and then guess what?
He defeats them.
There you go. Yeah. So
yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
right. But if nobody else knows, who's gonna come against you and say, no, that's not what they're like at all?
Yeah,
you're totally wrong.
Actually, Caesar, they weren't that hot.
Yeah. So should we get into what happens?
Yes.
I mean, let me tell. It's a little bit like all the other war books. Well,
in what way?
Guess what? Everybody dies.
Yeah.
But it does start out with sort of, the first book is probably the most famous of the books. And it's also when the most war kind of occurs, because his greatest triumphs come in the first few years that he's there. Did you ever read, what's that comic book? Why am I forgetting? Anyway, I'll come back to it. You know, the comic book, Asterix. Did you ever read Asterix?
No. What's it about? No, never even heard of it.
And you call yourself well-read?
I missed that comic book because I was reading the classics.
Oh, yeah. Well, you should go and read it now. It's a derivative of this. Like, it's a playing on the Gallic Wars.
And when is it set? Is it set
during the Gallic?
Modern day?
No.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they have all these funny names, but here's one of the funny names. Orgetorix. That's a funny name. So it starts out, Orgetorix is the leader of the Helvetii. He decides that they are all going to move. And so Caesar takes this as like nefarious, but it really probably wasn't. They probably were running out of food and just needed to move. So
wait, back up, Emily, back up.
Yeah.
Again, I'm new to this. Where are we talking? Where in the world is this happening? I assume it's happening. Is this Spain? Is this France?
Okay, sorry, did I not say? I said what I said.
Did you?
Yeah, well, okay, I'll explain that a little bit better.
Okay.
So he is in charge of Cisalpine Gaul, which is modern-day Provence, remember?
Okay.
So then beyond that is Transalpine Gaul. So it's, and you can tell from the names, like Belgae. Where do you think that?
Belgium.
There you go. And the Gomranii are from Germany. So it's north of southern France.
Okay.
And he is ranging all over that area. So the Gomranii are further east and further north, and they're the most fearsome, the very most fearsome.
And these are like large clans that we're talking about?
Tribes, yep. And so we have all sorts. You read a bunch of the tribes: the Belgae, the Aquitani, the Galli, the Helvetii, the Aedui. Do you want me to keep going? I mean, it just keeps going.
Yeah.
Lots of people that we don't have any relationship with, although they're most of our forebearers.
Yeah, right.
So if you're European, these are your people.
And I assume we don't have much of a record of them because
they didn't write anything down.
I was going to say, they were probably not writers, and maybe also they were conquered by Julius Caesar and others. Yeah, those are the two big reasons why people there's not much of a record of peoples. Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so now here's an interesting thing to modern day. When the Nazis are formulating their racial theories, they return to Caesar and Tacitus, both of them, and say, oh, see, we were clearly superior. Look at how we're described here.
No way.
Oh, yes.
They're like holding up the Gallic Wars as proof texts? Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yes. I mean, particularly Tacitus, but even in here, right? Because they are presented as like uber men. So there is very dodgy anthropology and Nazi thinking, connecting, like the superior race moves from Rome to Germany.
Okay, right.
And they're using this. You can kind of
see that move coming. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you can see it through his descriptions, because Caesar is really interested in making them fearsome, because then his achievements are more noteworthy.
Are greater, yep.
Right. Okay, so do you see where we are now?
I do, yeah. Now I'm located.
So we're in southern France, basically. So there's this group, the Helvetii and Orgetorix, like Asterix, get that? The comic book?
Nice.
Get it? Orgetorix is moving his people. So it's not nefarious. They probably just need a new land. But Caesar comes against them. And this is where you really get accusations. This is where you're like, wait, he's picking a fight. Because he totally was. He totally was picking a fight. So there's the normal passage. He goes to them, says, don't move. I'm going to attack you. They say, look, we're not doing anything. We're just trying to move. We don't want to come against Rome. We don't want to fight with you. Then give me hostages. And so he gives them hostages. And then he basically makes demands that are too hard to keep. And they're finally like, wait, we're going to fight you. But in the middle of this, Orgetorix, a very fearsome man, decides he's going to try and form alliances with other tribes to go against the Romans. And he is discovered and killed. But Caesar still attacks the Helvetii.
He's discovered and killed by who? By the Roman army?
By people sympathetic to Caesar.
Okay.
Yep.
Emily, what is the relationship? I don't want to take you too far off track, but what is the relationship between these different tribes? Are they like, hey, just keep your distance, you're cool over there if we're cool over here, or
are
they warring? No.
Yeah, they're definitely warring. I mean, it's tribal, so there's lots of descriptions of he married the daughter of the neighboring tribe and they formed an alliance, right? And so throughout this, there's different times where different leaders will arise and try to bring the tribes together. But with tribal groups, it's often hard to effectively fight an outside power because you're arguing amongst yourselves, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely what's portrayed here. And there's different times that different people are better at it than others. Different people will arise, like Dumnorix, who tries to do the same thing. And later in the Gallic Wars, there's another uprising in which the tribes somewhat come together. But nevertheless, they're weakened by their internal struggles.
Okay.
So, Caesar defeats the the Helvetii, but in the middle of it, it's not going good. And so I'm going to read you how Caesar reports what he does.
Oh, yeah.
Caesar first sent away his own horse out of sight, then did the same with everyone else's to make the danger equal for everyone and to eliminate any opportunity for flight. Then he encouraged his men and joined battle. The soldiers who were posted higher up threw their javelins and easily shattered the enemy's phalanx. Once it was broken, they drew their swords and charged the enemy. So there we go. Caesar in the midst with his men, fighting side by side.
Charging forward. Yeah.
Yep. What does he do? He sends all the horses away so that there's no chance of flight, right?
So do you have this feeling, wow, that's really brave, and how egalitarian, and is it true?
Yeah.
Is that how you feel about this? Is that how scholars kind of read this?
I think with his reports of battle, he is reported to be this.
He's reported to what?
He is reported to be very brave and very effective at leading his troops. So I don't think that is questioned necessarily so much. He's definitely not standing on the sidelines and watching his troops fight.
Right. Okay.
His accounts of where the people are and, actually, his accounts of how many people are slaughtered are actually questioned.
Okay.
So I was just reading a scholar who was talking about this accusation of genocide. And one of the points they made was that you really can't rely upon Caesar's numbers. And it's clear that people did survive, right? So these tribes were not wiped out.
Okay.
So did he inflate his numbers? Seemingly, because that seems more significant. It's a little bit like what we talked about in the book of Judges, where it says the tribes were totally wiped out. It's in some ways more a matter of speech than of actual record, right? Because they're saying they're now they're not going to come against them. They're now without power. They're now subdued, which is a different thing than being completely and utterly wiped out.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
What's complicated about this even further is that giving an account of how many soldiers were killed is always unscientific. And we're talking about 2,000 years ago, even more unscientific. So, whatever the numbers is, even if he's trying to be really, really faithful to the truth, it's a hard number to recount. It's a hard number to actually tabulate.
Yeah, it is. So he subdues the Helvetii, but then another great opponent arises. And this time it is from the Germanii, and it's Ariovistus. And he comes with his hordes, hundreds of thousands. I can't remember the number he says. I want to say it was like 480,000. But just upon people, upon people, upon people. And it's looking very bad, and his troops are very scared. And Caesar gives a great speech, and he turns the heart. It reminded me a little bit of Henry V.
Okay.
Like, we're
Friend of the show.
Friend of the show. Absolutely. We're outnumbered, but we are braver. We've got better skill. We know what to do. We're not going to run, and we're going to stand, and we're going to fight. And his favorite legion, the 10th Legion, comes through because he's at this point afraid of mutiny because it looks like some of his troops are going to mutiny. But they come through, and guess what they do?
They win. They conquer. What?
They do. Yeah, they win.
Okay,
so let me tell you, there aren't really any reports of bad things happening. Now, there are a couple reports of bad things happening. So he does try to go to Britain, and that does not go well for him. Big surprise.
And does he recount that it doesn't go well?
He does, actually.
Okay.
He does actually. But he does minimize that it doesn't go well for him, but he does say that. I mean, it just made me think, Britain has it. I mean, I guess at some point it does. The Romans, even his second landing goes better, and they have more success. But Britain is rarely invaded. Isn't that fascinating? In the whole history of the world, Britain has rarely been invaded.
That makes total sense. They're an island.
Totally. So he had to figure out, amphibious landings.
How am I going to get across the English Channel? Right.
Well, no, he had that figured out, but he did not have the amphibious landing figured out. That's what he did not have figured out. So
he knew how to get the people in the boats across the channel.
Yeah.
But was the difficulty landing in like an armed territory?
Yes.
Okay.
And then, So the second time around, he changes the shape of the boat so that they're better able to carry troops and land. Really interesting, right? He makes them shallower. So interesting to think about D-Day or something like that.
Yeah, right.
And so they do land, and the enemy is not right on the beach. The enemy has hidden themselves in the forest, but the rest of his ships are badly broken up in a storm. And so he has to beach all of the ships, or else he's not going to be able to get his troops back. And he has to set up a guard all around the beach to protect them while he fixes them.
Unbelievable. Wow. So that's a precarious position.
Totally. Because what if you're stuck on this island and you can't get back?
Right. Where are you going to go? You can't go backwards. You cannot go backwards. It's like Dunkirk. What is it? Like a third of the English army is trapped on the beach and they cannot go backwards into the ocean.
Exactly. So he is able to repair it, and he's able to protect the troops while they're repairing it. But nonetheless, he learns this is really difficult. There is another account where one of his generals or lieutenants decides not to follow Caesar's word, and he goes out and he's totally ambushed. But once again, it's not really Caesar's fault because they didn't listen to Caesar.
You mean the guy getting ambushed wasn't Caesar's fault? Right. If he had just taken good counsel. If he had listened
to Caesar, he wouldn't.
Is that too much to ask? One of the great rulers in history, you can't lend an ear?
It kind of makes you laugh just a little bit when you're reading it. Like, well, of course it went bad for him, but we don't get a lot of...
listen to the big boss.
But we don't get a lot of other reports of things not going. There's Caesar also sees all and knows all. So there's references throughout the account. And then Caesar was everywhere all at once, basically. And he was taking care of the baggage and making sure the soldiers were ready and encouraging the cavalry. And I mean, so it's
cooking
really
breakfast.
Funny, essentially. And in the last, it's these really short phrases, and it reads really fast. So you're, oh my gosh, he's everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
That sounds he's great. A superhero. Essentially, Caesar's a superhero. That's kind of how he comes out.
And so I assume it's the same thing as, or you read these sections and you're like, my gosh, what an incredible character. Is this true?
And, I just, whenever I read it, I think, what would I have been like if I'd been standing in the Forum in Rome and hearing it? And if I had been that person, I have to think I would have been like, he's amazing.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And can I just throw something else on that? There is no person that gets more glorified than a defending general or a general who is providing victory for your team.
Yep.
So you were going to be inclined to say, yeah, he does seem to be everywhere. Maybe this is inflated, but he's awesome. He's so great. Go, Julius.
Totally. And if you're a Roman, you do not carry with yourself what we carry with ourselves, which is a Christian understanding of killing people. And so if you're hearing about the Gauls dying, you're just like, yeah, and they should die. That's
a 250,000. Yeah.
That's what they need to do. So you're not troubled by the wiping out of these peoples who really haven't done anything. It's a little painful to read.
And so the other, how do I say this? He's setting them up as opposing tribes, but he's not making them into villainous bloodsuckers. He's just saying, I went out and I beat him because I'm the better man. In other words, what I'm trying to say is,
yes, I know what you're saying.
You can read some military accounts in which they're saying, we put down these enemy because the enemy was so bloodthirsty and immoral. They were they ate bats for breakfast.
Yeah.
He's not doing anything like that.
He absolutely is not. So he
just doesn't care.
He's not racializing it, right?
Yeah.
He's not saying that they're better, because in so many ways he mentions his opponents with respect.
Yeah.
Now, he also accuses them of being like two-timing, but like, hey, same charge could be leveled at Caesar. But he doesn't vilify them. Not at all.
Interesting.
Not at all. And, he says they're manly and they're strong and they're courageous. Right. He uses that language all the time, where he would accuse some Romans of being soft and luxurious,
Yeah. Yeah.
So we should probably be wrapping this up, huh?
Emily, do you have a hot take?
My hot take is, come up with one. My hot take is, I don't know if I have one. I don't know. Maybe my hot take is, and it's not a hot take because people have already said it, but I kind of feel like the accusation of genocide is fair.
Okay.
Kind of feel like that. But here's my hot take. I still think we should read Caesar. There you go.
Okay. Can you tell us, you said that the Gallic Wars is kind of being moved out of AP testing. Do you know the reasons why?
I don't know specifically, but I do believe a lot of it is over the uncomfortability with reading his account, which I just think is foolish. Like, look, people did things in different times at different places. Not reading them doesn't help us. Like, maybe our own uncomfortability with reading that these people are just massacred. Hey, that's maybe good. Keeps us from doing it ourselves, right?
Right. A warning. Yeah.
So why? And it's such beautiful Latin that I feel really sad for high school students not to do it, because it's beautiful Latin. I loved reading it. I loved reading it in Latin.
Emily, I think I used this story before. Hope not. But there's a story about Robert E. Lee would post the dumbest soldier in his army outside of his tent. Have I told you about this? He would recruit who he thought was the least educated soldier in his army, and he would post him outside of his tent. And when Robert E. Lee would write orders for other generals and lieutenants, he would have that soldier come in and read it. And he felt like, if this soldier understands what I'm saying, I have written clearly. I wonder if there's something about, if you're a general, you're having to communicate to huge numbers of people in your army, a large number of lieutenants and captains and commanders, and you have to speak not with poetic elegance, but you have to speak with with nouns and verbs.
Right. And if it's being read to people in the forum, same thing, right?
Yeah.
You've got to have vivid language to convey your meaning.
Right.
So,
Emily, the Gallic Wars.
Go read it, Tim.
A ringing endorsement. Okay, I'm putting it on my list.
Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for joining us for Hot Takes on the Classics. Our thanks to Clark Stefanik, our producer, to True North, our platform. If you like this show, you might like some of the others that are on the True North platform. And as always, thanks to Tom Hagerman for our music. He wrote it and performed it.